Granddads Ghost. One day after school, I went to visit my gran who lived just down the hill from my school. This is in Barbados. In fact, when I was at her house, I could see my school perched at the top of the hill and flanked by a tamarind tree. I used to love going to visit her and my auntie Maylene and her children who lived there with Gran. I used to play with Mayling's children who were roughly the same age as me. I was not allowed to stay long after school as I had to go back up the hill to get home before dark. My mum and dad will tell me that I could go down and see them sometimes, but make sure I left in plenty of time before the sun began to set and it got too dark for me to go back up the hill by myself. Everyone always used to say how psychic Granny was. Friends and neighbors were always coming to Gran's house saying they had such and such a dream and could she explain it and tell them what it meant. She was always happy to oblige. Mum, they would call her. Can you tell me what this dream means? I had a dream last night and came knocking, etc., etc. We would only hear bits of conversation as children, as Gran used to usher us out the back before they went into details. Everyone, including family and friends and neighbors, called our granny Mum. None of them ever called her by her first name, Iris, and so even her grandchildren adopted this way of calling her. I used to think that was her name when I was smaller. When I was big enough to realize that it was not her name, it took me a long time to get used to calling her Granny. Granny's house was like nature's workshop. Anytime any of her grandchildren had a cold or any other illness, she would either send us up the hill by the big tamarind tree or tell us what plants and herbs to pick if they were not already available in her back garden. We used to shudder at the thought and never wanted to go because we knew that whatever she brewed up would taste bitter and awful to us, but we also knew that within a day or so, whatever ailed us would be well on its way out or nearly gone. I used to love looking forward to the weekends, a lot of which I would spend at Granny's house. She was always cooking something, sewing something, crocheting something, or repairing a chair or sofa, or mending broken china. She had amazing skills. Often on a rainy day, she would make us cups of cocoa. We would watch her boil the milk first and then add the raw cocoa and brown sugar. The smell used to be heavenly. Sometimes she would boil the milk with a cinnamon stick or grate nutmeg over the top once it was boiled. After boiling this all up, she would stand by the open kitchen door, pouring it from one large cup to the next, back and forth, back and forth, as it frothed more and more. This was to cool it quickly in that hot Barbados weather. She would serve us with Bajan salt bread or eclipse biscuits spread with butter or honey or sometimes both. Or if there was any cake left over in the cake tin, we would have a slice of that with our lovely frothy cocoa. Curled under a thin sheet, even though it was hot, we loved to go under a sheet as we lay on the floor. Granny in her rocking chair, she would proceed to regale us children with some exciting story. We children tried to sip our cocoa as slowly as possible, and if we got biscuits, we would nibble round the edges until they got smaller so as to make them last as long as possible before the stories ended. this evening now, when I visited Granny, she was cooking my favorite fish soup with sweet potatoes, dumplings, yams, yellow split peas, all my favorite foods together. She told me I would have to wait a little while and eat it quickly when it finished, as she had only just started to cook it when I'd arrived. By the time I started to eat it, it was getting a little dull outside. So, practically bolting down the last bits, I wasn't going to leave one bit back. I kissed Granny and ran for the school hill. It was only about 5 minutes away from Gran's house, but by the time I got to the foot of the hill, it seemed darker than it should have gotten in those few minutes. Anyhow, it couldn't be helped. I started to go up the hill and then began to feel afraid. It seemed to be getting too dark too quickly. I was used to this hill. I knew it well. After all, I used it so often coming to and fro from Granny's house. But now, my familiar friend seemed scary to me. There was no moon. The only light was from the stars and what light reached the hill from the street lamp below, which was located at the end of the road, which ended where the hill began. As I got further up the hill, I tried to make out familiar bushes and plants, but the more I concentrated, the more they started to blur and blend into one another in that twilight. I had to keep looking away and refocusing to make any sense of one bush from another. I was beginning to think that I would never ever get up the hill. Why was it taking so long for me to get to the top? I wondered. There was one thing about the school hill that I was always wary of, and I used to hear many grown ups and even my teachers complain that it was an accident waiting to happen, and that it would take some over adventurous or unattended child to go playing around the thick trees and bushes there, only to fall to a sheer drop between the spaces of the trees and bushes. It was really like a gully, and because the trees were so thick, it was not possible for us to see how far that drop was. It was one place I never wanted to go, and even as an avid tree climber, it always gives me the shivers even to look too hard in its direction. The adults used to say that it needed a fence of some sort or strong railings, being so near to the school. Teachers would always be shouting at us if it appeared to them that we were straying over to that side of the hill. And now, here, less than halfway up the hill, I felt as though long, thin, bony monsters were on their way, creeping up through those thick vines to get me. At one time in my panic, I thought maybe if I lay there in the middle of the hill and look really hard at the stars and not look to anything else, the feeling would go away. And then maybe I would fall asleep. And when I awoke in the morning, it would be all bright. But that thought went as quickly as it came because I knew my mom would be frantic and my dad may even give me a beating. It was the fear of receiving a beating from him that pushed me towards the top of the hill. I must have looked so pitiful, this 9 year old little girl in the middle of a big hill in the dark. I suddenly heard a sound behind me, and just as more fear was about to register, I heard a man call my name and said, "Hello, hello, Diana." I looked around and there he was, so close. It startled me. He seemed nice. He told me it was a little dark for me to be out by myself. I began to tell him about waiting for and eating fish soup that Granny had made for me. I told him when I left Granny's house it was still light, but by the time I got to the foot of the hill, it suddenly got dark. He nodded as if he knew. He was telling me which way to move before I came upon a rock raised up in the ground so that I would not hit my foot or fall over it. He must have really good eyes, I thought. We chatted about everyday things. He asked me if I liked school, and I told him I loved it. He was limping on his left foot, and I asked him if it hurt, and he said no. He seemed really familiar to me, but I could not recall meeting him before. And even though he was a stranger to me, I felt that he loved me and I had no fear of him at all. We're here now. Go straight home. You'll be able to see your way just round the corner to your house. He pointed to the street lights. I looked up at them, looked back to thank him again, and he vanished. I ran the short distance round the corner to my house, and of course, my mum was pacing and looking worried. She asked me why I was late, but she had a feeling it was because I went to visit Granny. We had no telephone that Mum could call Granny. She said she had wanted to come and meet me, but was afraid that if I took one road and she took the next, she would miss me and I would get home and she would not be there. Poor Mum. I felt so sorry for her. I began to tell her how I ate fish soup at Granny and that it wasn't really dark when I left her house. I told her of the man who took me up the hill. I did not want to tell her how petrified I was before I met him. I told her how lucky I felt that the man came up the hill after me and he kept me company and showed me where to walk. Mom began to wring her hands, calling me by my name and telling me that it wasn't something I should have been happy about. And strange man, she went on. He could have been anybody, she was saying. No, Mom, I interrupted her. He asked me to say hello to you and tell you that Byne says he loves you so much and that he's okay and happy where he is. Coming up the hill, when he was explaining this to me, I thought he must have been a relative I had not seen for a long time, but vaguely remembered from somewhere because of the familiarity. He told me to tell you that he's proud of everything you have done. He said to tell you that his leg doesn't hurt anymore. Mom's eyes opened wide, and I thought she was going to faint. Fine, she muttered. Fine. But baby, that's your grandfather who died after having a stroke in his leg when I was 3 months pregnant with you.